Lovely to see you all here this evening. A bit of framing from me. I know, I think pretty much everybody in the room knows this, but I'll say it anyway. But welcome to Heads Up for Head Teachers. This is part of an ongoing series that we do every other Wednesday, where we look at big hopes for education. So we work with Big Change. And Big Change created a manifesto about 19 months ago, which was looking at the hopes that we might have for the education system as we move into, as it was, a new decade, as we move forward into the future. So this is number 9. I can't quite believe we're on number 9 already. I'm not quite sure where the time's gone, but we're on number 9. We've got one more to go, which will be in a couple of weeks' time. But it's lovely to see you all here this evening. These events are slightly different to the Heads Up sessions that I know many of you attend and take part in on a weekly basis. Our Wednesday evening drink sessions and our Saturday morning coffee mornings, which are sort of intentionally crafted spaces to provide support for head teachers. And that's very much the space that Heads Up for Head Teachers operates in. We're passionate about and have a vision and a mission which is built around providing safe, authentic, honest, supportive and celebratory spaces for head teachers to connect with each other. It's very much mainly down to Kate's hard work, but it's very much a growing community. We have now 650 plus head teachers who are active members of Heads Up for Head Teachers, and we have sort of 3,000 plus who are what we call passive members, so they know about us and they have our details. And basically we're here for them if they need us. So if that's a crisis coaching call, we offer that. If they need to pick up the phone because they're really struggling with something, we offer them that. And then we also offer our peer support sessions on a twice weekly basis. And indeed, increasingly now we do those with local authority areas as well, and create bespoke spaces in local authority areas to support head teachers. So that's our passion, that's our vision, that's our mission, that's what we're all about. But part of those conversations and what's come out of those peer support sessions over the course of the last 12 to 18 months, has been, we're very much a sort of values aligned network. And part of that values alignment is that we are celebratory about the education system and the work that head teachers do within it as it currently exists. But we are also passionate about transformational change in the education system with a really strong belief that it's not about reformation and improvement. It's actually about change to something different that I think the whole network feels really passionately about, and as leaders in that network we feel really passionately about. And within that work and within this work we work with a whole range of partners and partner organizations, sort of rather perversely, one of whom I'm going to represent tonight. So I'm going to take my sort of founding hat off for Heads Up for Head Teachers. I'm going to put that to one side, and then I'm going to put my exec leader of whole education hat on, because the work that we do at whole education sort of fits this brief. But ordinarily we would, on these events, we would provide sort of expert inputs, but we felt that actually this one's very much about community, and we actually wanted to get your views, as part of the Heads Up for Head Teachers network and community. We wanted to hear from you about the work that you're doing in your communities around this theme. But I'm going to kick it off with a little bit of a sort of overview of why this particular Hopes for Ed really resonates with the whole education network. So it's an opportunity to do that as well. So if you've not heard of Whole Ed, so Whole Education is it's an 11 years old network. It's a network of schools and trusts across the country. We work with sort of 500, 600 schools in total, probably. We're what we refer to as a deliberately and intentionally small network. And the reason for that is we believe that as part of the work that we do with our network, we have really great relationships with our schools. So we're not an arm's length network. And it won't be a surprise to many of you in the room who know me that the values of the whole education network very much align with the values of the Heads Up for Head Teachers network. So the work that we do with schools, one of the reasons why we're intentionally small is, I think that the analogy that we use quite often is that in the last decade, the work of the whole education network has felt a little bit like the Rebel Alliance, using a Star Wars analogy, sort of fighting against the Empire. and the culture that has been created in our education system. So that is another reason why we're deliberately small. But at its heart, the work that we do, you know, in the same way that we talk about values-led leadership and heart leadership, the work that we do with leaders in the whole education network very much aligns. And we're called whole education deliberately because we think a whole education is important. But we, you know, the word whole education, the phrase sort of holistic education, fully rounded education gets used a lot. And the link to this particular session is that we have 3 principles that guide our interpretation of what a whole education is. And the first one is that a whole education is one that gives children the skills, qualities and knowledge, whole education, that they need to thrive in life, learning and work. The second one is that we have interesting and engaging learning opportunities as part of school life that create in young people a sense of agency and ownership over their learning. And then the third one, which is really relevant to this, is that you know, we believe that learning doesn't just happen in schools and isn't just the responsibility of the schools. Learning is actually a community endeavour. And has always been a community endeavour. It just so happens that the bulk of it happens in the schools that we create within those communities. But we define a whole education as one where learning is happening in school, in the classroom, outside of the classroom, in local community spaces with parents, with pupils, and with community members, businesses, and local industry. So, you know, that's very much our sort of take on whole education and what that means. And you can hopefully you can see the definition for this heads up session behind me is that, you know, our schools, the schools in the network and the trust in the network, they really buy into this notion that you know, they are thriving as part of a local community. And of course that's never been probably more true than it has through the last 12 months, where the work that schools and trusts have been doing with their communities, you know, perhaps outside of the usual very narrow frame of what education is all about, has absolutely broadened out. So that, you know, that's a little bit about whole education and the work that we do and the reason why we think that is important. And, you know, I think what I'm interested in is sort of views from around the room about how this resonates with you as school leaders or former school leaders. And we've got sort of a few questions to ask around this. So I'm going to kick us off with the first one. So I'm interested in what your experience of working collaboratively outside of your school to sort of create benefit for young people. So I'm really interested in sort of the work that you are either currently doing or the work that you have done with schools to work in the community, and what your experience of that has been, and where that, you know, where that's been really successful and where you think, yeah, that's really celebratory. So with that as the opening question, which I'm happy to repeat at any point if I've said it very quickly, you'll have to forgive me. I've just come off the back of a 7-hour live event, so I'm probably talking very fast. But if you want me to repeat the question, please just ask. But Chris, as you are there on my screen, I'm going to come to you, Chris. So Chris, sort of examples from your school and your community about how you think you're helping, you know, big picture to sort of thrive in Doncaster, and how the community helps you to do that.
I think the important thing has been, you know, schools for me have always been very much at the centre of the community and the things that we organised and ran to support the community. So we were very much engaged with health and social care and working with them on the school site, because we noticed in our schools, for example, that access to services was one of the issues on our deprivation indicators for our families. So instead of the services going to people going to the services, we brought the services. One of the biggest successes we had was linking up detached youth work with nurses, you know, sort of, and going out into the parks and things like that with healthcare initiatives for young people in the parks on a Friday night, for example. And we had huge success in that sort of project. The other projects we worked on were engaging parents with the education of young people and learn together, care together type initiatives that were incredibly important for the work that we were doing. And very much it was a case of, well, the school can be a 24/7, a 365-day facility for families. That's what we did. That's what we set up to make that happen.
Awesome, Chris. And was that, I mean, in doing that work, did you see that very much as a embedded in the work that you're doing? Because I think sometimes the danger with some of the sort of schools and communities work, that it feels a bit like a bolt-on.
No,
and the way that you're describing it, it's clearly not.
No, this was part and parcel of everything that we did. The idea with some of the schools that we worked in, as you can imagine, James, were areas quite challenge deprived areas, and one of the things that we want to do, if I start with a very simple statement, was that if we want to raise literacy in the school, give our young people experiences to describe, to explain, and we took the same view with our parents. So we funded the post of a parent support advisor and all of those things, so that parents were involved in the school throughout the school day and beyond, and likewise with our children, because it was so much part and parcel of, if we were going to make the difference, we needed the parents as real honest partners in making that difference. And so it was part and parcel of everything we did. It was built into the core of the school.
Yeah, awesome. Brilliant. Thank you.
Interestingly, not something Ofsted ever reported on.
Yeah, funny that. I think we quite often end up back at Ofsted at some point in these conversations. Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because it's the again, we talked before in this space, but that sort of reductive view of what education is versus the reality of all of the work that we actually do.
Yeah.
And it's so much more than that very narrow frame which Ofsted sort of look at what the work of schools.
Well, I think it was, one of the great successes of it was that we took NEETs from 15% of the school population to 0 and maintained it there, because we were able to work with the parents at the transition at 16.
Yeah,
because they trusted us, and we were able to work with them in that, so that they weren't falling out at the point where they would fall out and become NEET.
Yeah, and and I think that's the power of it, the power of sort of community work, and I suppose that contextual and that really deep understanding of work in the community and what the community needs. It's why I get, as people in here will know, I get sort of mildly annoyed by the sort of social mobility agenda, because at its very heart, what that's saying is children should leave their communities, and actually it's kind of like, oh, flipping heck, how snobbish can you get? It's sort of like, you need, your education will lead to social mobility, and then you'll leave the community that you've come from and go and do great things elsewhere. Actually, what about doing great things in the community that you exist in?
It was interesting. In one of my schools, we actually built a facility in the center of the community, in the center of the estate. So we were in the same vicinity. We were in the same place to work with the families.
Yeah, awesome. That sounds great, Chris. Thank you for kicking us off, Chris. Sharifa, I'm going to come to you next. What does sort of community collaboration mean for you?
I think what's worked really well is putting the child at the center, and throughout the pandemic and post, after lockdown as well, what we've done is we've worked really well with parents in putting the children at the center, and I will not have any other really, and helping the parents to understand as well, because for a lot of them, and we serve quite, I wouldn't say that it's very affluent, it's middle class really, it's a very small village school, and straight in it's about the academic, it's about how you're going to challenge the children. And I will have conversations with the parents to say, no, actually it's not just about your child, it's about every child, it's about every child that we serve here, about not just a short term, but the long-term vision as well. And I think that's gone really well, because in every single newsletter so far, I've had such feedback from the parents as well, because a majority of them understand that and they see that, and we're working together hand in hand along with the teachers as well. We have virtual parents consultation day, parents meeting, whatever you want to call it, this Friday as well. And even then, you know, I've set almost the agenda for everyone that we are not going to talk about attainment. We are not going to talk about whatever it is results. We're going to talk about your child and what it is that we have to do together. But it's not about just your child, because I've had a few parents as well, of course, because of lockdown and isolation, they can only think, rightly so, think about their family and their children. But what I'm trying to encourage is we think about every child and all the children. We think about all of us together. And I'm working with the local community as well. So with the local parish, we're getting them on board, having meeting with them and thinking about the wider network. And it's only a small area on the edge of Slough, but I'm also passionate about working with other primary schools in the area as well. So we're networking and working together, and we have a very similar agenda, although we are separate schools and we have slightly separate cultures, but again, making sure that we always come back to the HT email trail today. My internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. It's dropping out a little bit, Sharifa, but
yes,
you're good.
Good. Okay. Yeah. So, you know, I was asked to speak this Saturday, which I will be doing up next to Michael Rosen, talking exactly about this and talking about children's well-being. I am excited and extremely nervous as well, because I'm up next against my hero, really. I can recite we're going on a bear hunt without even looking, you know, without even reading the book. And I can't believe I'll be speaking passionate about and what we are all passionate about, but we are thinking about our children, their future, their lives, and also about society in general. There's so much not quite right, and we know that. We can talk for hours and days about this, but it's in our hands. And if we can't help our parents and our community to see this, you know, we're chipping away at that hope, if you know what I mean. I showed a grandmother around school today, because I'm encouraging our new parents to come and walk around school, you know, and just show them one at a time, you know, COVID measures and whatever it is. And her grandson is coming to our reception in September, and she's walking around school. She stopped in what I call our celebration corridor, because we celebrate every single child. It's a diversity corridor. You can call it whatever you want, but events have taken such a turn in our world that we need to make this visible. We need to make every child visible. And she could see that. I didn't have to tell her. She stopped and she looked, and there's this massive rainbow that the children had made, and there are words that the children had made on feathers as well, and it's about wings. And she said, my grandson, and it very difficult circumstances that her grandson had grown up in. I mean, he's only 5, but he was taken off his mom, and you know, that kind of family as well. And she said, I can see my grandchild thriving here, because she just could feel it. And if somehow we can create that culture in our little village school, we can create it everywhere. So that's how we're collaborating in my school. So hopefully together with our other local primary schools and in the wider field as well, we can come back to what should be good.
Yeah, it's really good, Sharifa. And I think that, looking behind me, I think what that really resonates with is that notion of resilience, local and regional networks, and actually looking at all of the different, as it says on there, actors, but actually, you know, all of the different people who can contribute to building that resilient network. And you know, that I love that sort of intergenerational work, you know, and how we can bring in other generations from the local community, as well as local businesses and other providers, to create that really strong network of community learning on behalf of young people. I think that's fantastic. Kevin, you've asked a really good question in the chat around you know, projects that involve sort of children and young people acting as ambassadors in the local community. Do you want to expand on that a little bit? Oh, you're still on mute, Kevin. And just to say, I did that.
Oh, there we go.
5
Rookie
times.
mistake. Yeah, what I'm interested in is having pupils change the perceptions of what schools are focused on within their community. We often know there's a sort of challenge between what head teachers are asked to do in terms of standards and targets, etc., and the old Ofsted framework, and what the school community needs and what those pupils need as a result of being within that community. So I'm interested in ways in which we can change the perceptions of parents as to what a good school is, and using pupils to do that within the community. I'll take you back to a project I did up in Lincolnshire many moons ago, when my beard wasn't quite so grey, and I set up a student consultancy where I tied the curriculum to the needs of the community. What we did is we took over what was the old library, and I installed the business studies students in there to run a small company, which was linked to the community. And that company acted as a referral unit. So they went out seeking projects in the community, identifying what they were, getting together a sort of written brief, and then approaching students through their teachers in the curriculum who were studying things or doing things that linked to that brief. So, for example, an A-level geography student ended up doing a traffic census and survey for a local company who was trying to get some traffic lights installed. And they ended up doing all the sort of data analysis and putting forward the proposal. I mean, there was a couple of projects, and these were paid projects, by the way. The students earned money as a result of that. And it went great till I left, and then it stopped. But that's always the case, isn't it, I think? We had a meeting in the hall one day where the head said, well, yeah, have a meeting, but I'm not sure who'll turn up. And 300 companies turned up into this rural community school to actually express their interest and support for the project. And I think it was great because it began to change the perceptions. It was bringing people into school. They could see what school was about. They could meet the pupils, who they only saw on the way to and from school a lot of the time. And then the perceptions of the pupils' behaviour as well, from the community changed. So I think it's a powerful tool, using pupils to change the attitudes of the local community. And I think one that at the moment, with the challenges that schools are facing, one that is so important.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I think I'm seeing lots of people around the room nodding as well. And I think that's the point for me, is that in the pandemic, I think that's one of the things that was almost sort of revisited. Certainly, I know one of the schools in the whole education network that, I mean, it's essentially has been bouncing along sort of special measures and requiring improvement for most of the last sort of 15 years. And whose community had really fallen out of love with it, because of course within that framework, all they're hearing all of the time is
negative
school's not very good because Ofsted say it's not very good.
Yeah.
And actually during the pandemic, they did what lots of schools did, and they did lots of community outreach work. They were delivering lunches for children. There was a huge connection back to the community, and suddenly overnight, the community were going, oh, this is a great school. So when the school was allowed to focus on those things that it felt were important for its community, the way that the community viewed the school was very, very different. And I think, certainly, if I think about a couple of examples, and Colin, you'll know this, XP, they do a huge amount in their community in Doncaster, around project work, which is meaningful project work in the community. There's another example is Matthew Moss. Also up in the north, Matthew Moss School, they build the whole of their curriculum is built around local context. So I think when you do get that real sort of sense of engagement in the local community and the context of the local community, then it can be really powerful for changing sort of community views. Fabulous, thank you, Ken, for that. Has anybody got any specific examples of how they may have used pupil or student ambassadors in the local community to run projects? Gina.
typed it all out. It wasn't in my last school. I kind of worked on that. I sort of broadened it. In the school before that, where I was a head, we had our school council were really wanting to do something with their local community. So they put together a lunchtime and after school initiative and spoke to all the local leads. So we had the PCSO, we had the local councillor, we had the vicars, the owner of the old folks home and the nurseries, and they put together they organised it all, a whole programme of things that each year group could do. So I just put one of the most memorable was a whole group of children were going weekly to play board games at the old folks home. And it was just amazing because the reciprocal benefits from that, all the stories they heard about their area, and hearing all of that, the dialogue that was happening, but also the impact on the old folks who had been in there. Some of them didn't have families, some of them didn't really have an awful lot of contact with kids. It was just a delight to see. It was amazing. So kind of took those principles to my next school to think how we could do that more and build that into curriculum as well.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I remember doing that at primary school, going and singing. That we used to have an old people's home just up the road. We used to go and sing to them every week.
Yeah.
You know, and I just, again, I think that sort of intergenerational stuff is so important for giving people a connection and rooting them in their community.
And we had all sorts going on. The PCSO, that was a brilliant link because, you know, that link with the police, they were litter picking and they were doing all sorts linked to what the community needed. So kind of tried to build that in when I was revisiting the curriculum in my last school, thinking how can we actually put this into what we're doing daily rather than just as a project or an after school or something else to widen the scope really.
Yeah, and that notion of embedding it rather than having it as a bolt-on, I think, is so important.
Yeah.
And Colin, sort of, you know, you made the point in there about the connection between Big Picture and XP and Matthew Moss, which actually I didn't know there was that connection. What about Colin? What about you and Big Picture and the work that you do in the community?
Yeah, I was just thinking about. I think we started off with interactive community because they robbed the local co-op now and again, my kids. But that's probably not the most effective way of doing it. What we've reflected quite a lot this week actually, because obviously we're trying to let the personal and social stuff help them navigate schools. When they're back in, they're not getting into grief and they're not having rows all over the place. And we started actually just turning that into just people interacting with people. We had a big conversation around racism this week, and one of my team found it really challenging actually, because she was challenging the attitudes of the learner, but being very careful that what she was actually doing was challenging the attitudes of the parent, not the learner, and trying to do that as a way that you weren't slagging off my dad sort of thing in terms of the conversation. So but we did sort of then just get into this whole idea of how you interact with people, and it doesn't matter whether that person is a teacher, one of us, one of them, someone in the community, black, white, old, young, female, male, all those kind of things actually. And it was really, it was really interesting to just be able to get them to reflect. And so I think, we sort of build around the community what we've got, and we got the kids to the point of, being very respectful to each other and to us within that community. But then we've had to work this week, and this is very small scale. We're not setting up old people's homes. This is very small stuff. But at the same time, when they're going out, like two of them were getting the taxi journey home, and in the taxi journey, that was when they would stop being civil and being polite and using their sense of community. So we had the conversation about it's you're not doing it here because you're going to get told off if you don't. You do it because it's the right thing to do and it's a good thing to do, and hopefully trying to bring that out into the way they interact all around them. And we talk a little bit about Immanuel Kant. He said basically, when you're about to do something, think if everyone in the world did it in the way you're about to do it, what kind of world would you live in? And actually that gets them to reflect a little bit on, if we all did this, what would it be? And all those kind of work. So yes, it's really interesting. I mean, the main thing that or the sort of project thing we might do in terms of community we're trying to do is to get a petting farm going next door. So we've got to go through, I had a great conversation last week with someone from planning, who I asked to help me to fill in the planning application, who said, it'll be good to do one. I've not done one before. I'm not sure how they work. I'm like, but you're the person responsible for granting me the permission to do it. So that was an interesting way to go around things. But that will enable us to then to get our kids not only to work with the animals, which is great for them, because it's amazing when you put kids with animals and you go, look, you know, you spent all day with a dog and nobody was rude and nobody swore. You can do it. Let's now do that with people. But at the same time, then they'll be able to bring the community into that facility and look after it and care for it, and it'll be a real sense of putting something back. And so, you know, so we're looking to get that done. But I think with us, it's a very you know, it's a very small scale bit, actually, just in terms of the interactions and the sense of community, and the idea of Ubuntu that we try and talk about. Though I know loads of people talk about that, but, you know, trying to get that around a group of 4 or 5 kids who actually do not know how to interact. And so building that to start off with, and then thinking, how does that broaden out into the other things that we can do? So yeah, but the other bit we do in terms of community stuff is, obviously we are then able to link into the global community. So we talk to schools in Italy, we talk to schools in Kenya. We're actually bringing over, don't tell anyone, we've got some funding we can access that Kenya can't, because not able to access it. So I'm pretending the Kenyan head teacher is one of my staff, and we're going to fund Kenya to come and be part of this group thing that we're doing, hopefully in Italy at some point. You know, so there's that sense of community we've got, which is a huge global sense, and it is very it's very family. You know, we do talk. So, you know, I'm helping a girl from Barbados to navigate coming to Doncaster to do A-levels, which I would probably want to go the other direction, but that's where she's looking. So we're doing that kind of work, and so there's that broader sense of community in terms of in terms of big picture being part of that community. But I think what we're really focused on is just trying to develop that spirit of you know, decency and community and respect and love around it is what we do. You know, and I talk to my kids about, you know, how they should actually have that level of compassion and care and respect and love for each other, and talking about kind of how my staff, you know, how I feel when the learners are addressing my staff in ways that are not particularly supportive, and the fact that I've appointed these guys and I absolutely adore them as my team, and, you know, I don't want them to feel this kind of thing. So it's a very, very diddy, but hopefully it'll have waves, you know.
But I think I think that's the point for me, is that, you know, that some of these projects can be really large scale, but actually, you know, at their heart, they're all achieving the same thing, and the scale of them I don't think is important. It's about creating that connection with a community at a really, I mean, we talk about this a lot in the HeadsUp network, but at a really human level. And that's sort of what strikes me is that the connection of Hopes4Ed number 9 with all of the other ones, actually, you know, Hopes4Ed right away 1 to 8 all the way through. That actually, if we take a broader view, you know, if you look at the title, that as part of local learning ecosystems, it's when we start to take a broader view of what learning and education actually is, that it becomes much easier to create these very authentic opportunities to connect to the local community. And it's when the learning is perceived to be as narrow as some people would have us believe it should be, that actually the community connection becomes harder, because it becomes inauthentic. And it's really hard. You end up bolting stuff on rather than bedding it. But ultimately, it's all about, for me, it's all about, you know, it becomes, communities are resilient because everybody knows each other, and they, you know, it's very, very supportive. And at its heart, Colin, I think, if I've understood correctly, that's what you're doing, is creating.
Yeah. What is interesting with our guys actually is, what's interesting with ours is kind of like how they you know, obviously would be considered to be the you know, I was joking around them, you know, lifting stuff from the co-op, but you know, they're considered to be the bad kids and that's why they come to us. That's why we're working with them. When we had the floods in Doncaster, you know, they were out there lugging sandbags up to old ladies' drives and getting them all set up and stuff like that as well, you know. And when you come in and said, you know, what do you want to do? Like, we want to go, and it was not, shall we go and do it? It wasn't a suggestion from us. It was from them saying that's where they wanted to go. That's what they wanted to get involved in, you know. And I think that the bit that's really sort of really good, I think, is that some of this work just enables them to really to see who they can be and to show themselves how good they can be, you know, and they don't recognize that in them enough. So it's quite hard for them to give it back, because nobody's really recognizing it and acknowledging it. And I think, you know, a lot of people in the chat have been talking about children being seen and being recognized and that kind of thing, and that's a huge part of what we're trying to do. So, you know, in terms of us giving any kind of reward to the child, whatever we do, in terms of, you know, just using the class chart system as point to that, but it's not actually about the point, it's about the language you use while you're delivering it. So I'm recognizing you, and community is one of our 3 habits of work and learning. So we have challenge, opportunity, and community. So, you know, we're actually giving certificates for community, and it's part of the everyday language we use in all of our systems around school.
And what's nice about that is it creates an intrinsic reward rather than an extrinsic reward, so that, you know, the reward comes from the way that you are made to feel as part of a community, rather than a badge or a sticker that you might get. But actually, what's lovely about that, Christina, I'd like to come to your example of the Happiness Club and the random acts of kindness that you put in the chat, because I think again that, you know, that does the same thing. It creates this sense that actually I can get a sense of reward intrinsically through doing something good for other people. But do you want to expand on that a little bit, Christina?
Yes, hi, hello everyone. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be here. I feel like a bit of a fraud. I'm not a head teacher, but Kate has invited me in because of the work I do in schools. So I am a primary school teacher with over 20 years experience, but I'm a coach and I work with the biosphere with schools to improve their culture and their ethos, bringing beingness and enoughness into school communities. So one of the areas, you like that, TJ, like, I'm an imposter, I'm not a head teacher. I thought, shall I get involved in the chat? Would you mind? Great question. But what it is, it's about, it really is about raising the collective consciousness of, we know we're doing the right things as schools, and it's getting other people to see that rather than force them to see it. And with children, it's about knowing their impact in the world, and it matters, and that they can have an impact with a small random act, a small act, but they feel lit up inside, they feel powerful, and they realize that I can impact people that I don't know, that I'm not friendly with, that aren't in my family. And the reason why this is so important is, for example, the other day I was at the traffic lights, 2 cars in front of me, some window gets wound down and some chap chucks out loads of rubbish from his window, a bottle, a McDonald's container, more cans. And I was going through a bit of emotional time with my mum's health at the time. And I, without missing a beat, jumped out my car, ran and got the rubbish, and I chucked it back through his window. And then I'm thinking, I've not thought this through. And as I'm backing away, I didn't want to turn my back. And as I'm backing away, I'm thinking, you've not thought this through. I've never done anything like that in my life. But you know, you get to a breaking point, you think, oh, for goodness sake, one thing, but about 6, you're having a laugh. So this guy gets out his car and he goes, what do you think you're doing, you're scum? And I'm like, oh, we've got kids in the car, you're scum. And then his wife gets out the car, massive, big Audi. What do you think you're doing, you're scum? We've got kids in the car, And I'm thinking, I don't see the connection between kids in the car and you tipping all your rubbish on the floor in my neighborhood. And I said, I don't see what kids has got to do in the car. And then between his car and mine, there was another car. And I just thought, okay, Christina, you've not thought this through. Do not turn your back on this meathead. You've not thought this through. And I just thought, right, what can you do? And I had a Gandhi moment. I thought, hold steady, just hold steady. And I just stood there, and literally they're getting their rubbish and they're throwing it back at me. And no one's getting out the car to say anything. And I'm stood there going, hold steady, maintain your biosphere, hold steady. And I just had this calmness, and they're throwing this rubbish. And then they got to the end of their ranting, and luckily the lights changed. They jumped back in the car and off they went. But there was a little girl in the back of the car, ginger hair, freckles. And I looked her in the eye and she looked at me, and I thought, can you see these teachers' eyes? Can you see these eyes? If you were in a classroom, you'd want to please your teacher, and you'd want to have a negative association, I hope, with chucking rubbish out your car, that has a negative impact and you don't do that again. And I've got no idea. And you can bet these people got home and, do you know what this girl, do you know what she said? And they'd have made me out to be some horror. They wouldn't have said, you know, some 50-year-old woman with glasses chucked our rubbish back through the car. And the point I'm making is, those people, I cannot understand, did not realize the impact of chucking rubbish out their car. And that I cannot comprehend. But what I do know is they went to a school, and I do know is that that child in the back goes to school, and they think it's okay to do that to the environment, and it's just not. And it's having that, if we go out and do random acts of kindness, and if we teach children, you impact your neighbor in Africa by what you do here, you impact your neighbor in the neighboring, you know, district, because we need to think about each other. As these points have been made, we need to think about each other, and all these initiatives about, it's not just about you. And I think, who was saying about, it's not just about your child. Can't see you on this, Sharifa, it's not just about your child. And what this pandemic has shown us, we've got to have this connection, this consciousness where we all look after each other. And an easy way, go and give someone a flower, go and give someone a sweet. But we did put notes on car windscreens so they didn't think that they came home and their missus got a flower on their car, and they've got an admirer they haven't told their other half about. We thought, better be safe in that sort of situation. But it's about we impact the energy field, we impact the universe, we impact everybody, and it starts with little small things in our staff, with each other, with our community. And I think using the term neighbour is a powerful way. Yeah. So that's my little story. And then, so in any school, this is just simple and easy, isn't it? It's a little cheap things to do. And we've got other schools, and other supermarkets giving us flowers to give out. So you can do it, you can do it free or cheaply. Yeah. Energy in the universe, yes.
Yeah. And it's that point about, and where this brings up, the session I've been doing this afternoon with the Whole Education Trust has been about the purpose of education, and defining that purpose around some sort of global issues, really, and sort of deliberately designing. We talked about this in this forum before around curriculum and what's in our curriculum, but we were looking at the sort of purpose of education through the lens of sort of Valerie Hannon's research of the global perspectives on that. And it's that notion that actually the purpose of education should be about community and a young person's place in their community, and the big issues that therefore exist. So, like the climate crisis, like technological development, but actually we can apply those things locally within our local communities. They don't have to be things that are happening elsewhere. So I think, whenever I hear of anything which is really driving at the heart of that sense of place for young people, that's how you get really good behavior in young people. You can get really good behavior by making them walk on the left-hand side of a corridor with their bag over the right-hand shoulder and sticking them in an isolation room somewhere, or you can give them a sense of importance and place and belonging, and you'll get good behavior out of them that way. And it's a big difference in terms of the way that we approach young people as members of our community, not as future members of our community. And I think often in the school system we fall into the trap of thinking of young people as for the person they're going to be rather than the person that they are now. And that I think really resonates with me. And I love the notion of spreading happiness and random acts of kindness as ways of creating that connection. It's just brilliant. Christina, thank you for that. Does anybody else want to jump in with an example? Julie, how about you?
Hi everyone. I feel so inspired by all of you. I've just, as you can hear, my daughter's calling me. Yes, can I come back to you?
Yeah, do. We'll go somewhere. We will come back to you, Julie. Don't you worry. Not a problem before at all.
James.
Yeah, Jenny.
Julia made a point earlier, and it was something that I was thinking about as well with some work I did in Barnsley. Sometimes you have parents that have had very negative experiences of schools themselves, and sometimes it's literally reaching that hand out and showing them that your school that you have created is not the school that lives in their memory, and that their children are not going to experience what they experienced. So I worked in a school in Barnsley, in a very deprived area. We sat right in the middle of our community, and we had, like no fields or anything like that, but we created a really, really safe space for children to be. And we couldn't figure out, or we were trying to figure out, why our parents literally dropped and ran.
Yeah.
Or why, we had 6 and 7 year olds walking to school on their own, which, I did that when I was younger, but that was for a very different reason. And I knew that every parent was looking out for me as we all walked down the street together. And so we put in something called Ready, Steady, Play, where we took our very youngest children and their parents, where they were about to join us in nursery, and we spoke to the local health visitors to sort of discuss what problems and issues are they seeing in 2-year-olds. And we did a 5-week session, and to start off with, we literally had to go to the houses and beg the parents to come in for these sessions, and told them they're incredibly low threat. And basically what we did was we brought them into the early years area. We took all of our other children out of the early years area, which was not easy to do, but we managed it. and we would run a very gentle session, and we were actually supporting our parents to sing nursery rhymes, to talk. We'd do an activity like messy play or cutting and sticking or building something out, junk modelling, and then we'd give them a pack with all the stuff in so that they could then do it at home as well afterwards. But also what we were doing is showing these parents that, yes, my official title is deputy head, yes, I'm the designated safeguarding lead, yes, I'm the SENCO, but actually I'm a person, and I'm a person like you, and this is the nursery teacher, and yes, this is her name, but she is a person. And you know what, she can't sing either, but she will sing every single day with your kids, because singing matters. And working from that point, it was then encouraging them at every other point in school, come in, see us, come to assembly, come to parents' evening, look at us, we are humans, we want to talk to you, we want to support you. And it was such a small start, but it was starting at the beginning with our parents alongside their children. And when we ran it the second time, we didn't have to go out begging our parents to come. They actually were literally saying, when are you doing it? So, you know, straight away that word got out there that this was something we were doing. But it was hard. But it was undoing their memories of their school.
And I think there's something that, for me, what I was fascinated about that, and what you've said, Jenny and Julia, from that I know has resonated with people around the room, and Chris has just made a really good point in the chat as well. You know, because I think we forget how intimidating schools can be. You know, even for those that haven't had a bad experience at school, you know, I can remember sort of, you know, as a teacher, middle-class parents having to come into my office for a conversation, and you know, they would say jokingly, sort of say, "Oh my God, this makes me feel like a little child," you know, and schools actually can be really intimidating places, you know, for the humans that exist in our community. And I think it's about creating those community connections enables those barriers to be broken down. And when I look behind me now, I see, you know, resilient local and regional networks that help a range of actors provide more varied learning. Actually, you know, whenever you talk to schools, they're also about how can we get our parents more engaged in the learning of our young people. And actually, the first thing, as you're describing, you need to do is get the parents more engaged in school, and feel like it's a safe space for them as well to engage with, and not something which intimidates them. And you know, I don't think we always get that right. So I love that piece of work about getting that right, because we know that once we've done that, then it's much easier to get them on board to help with the young people's learning. Brilliant, really fantastic. Julie, you're back. Is your daughter all right?
Yeah, it was if she only wanted her headphones on Randall. I said, really? You interrupted me? Okay. Anyway, I was going to say, so I'll give a bit of context. I'm a new head teacher of a new school in Northampton, and it used to be part of a children's centre, and I'm just learning about how that used to operate, and I'm very familiar with children's centres anyway. And I think in terms of supporting, I think many head teachers would agree it was one of the worst things that the government ever did, in my opinion. One of the worst. It was one of the most successful things they put in was children's centres, and one of the worst things that they removed funding for. It was school. They were generally connected to schools or community centres, and generally when they were connected to schools, they were so powerful. It just completely changed the culture of a school. So we've got the school educating, but we've got this community hub. One of the things that I think that from hearing the rhetoric behind the gap between disadvantaged children and non-disadvantaged children, to do with you know, COVID and the missed school and everything, is when I was part in Leicester, I joined a Close the Gap for Disadvantaged Children, and I represent that group. I came from that background and I was successful, and I look back on why. And I did have a rough time in my disadvantaged background, which I don't even like the word disadvantaged financially, but I had a lot of advantage too, was people had high expectations of me, luckily, in my pathway. I met people way after school that expected more of me. I think sometimes we assume too much. We make a lot of assumptions. I read all the rhetoric and I'm like, how do you know that? How do you know that? Because then we're not all the same. I think that it's again about representation. I think we need to have empathy, but not sympathy. I think sometimes our sympathy makes us want to fix these people. We need to fix them. We need to, you know, and it's out of love, but it's wrong. We need to offer empathy. What's your story? And what can I do to empower you to get out of this situation that you're in? And I think that's a really mind switch that the children's centres used to do, because people, it ended up being the people that were attending from deprived areas used to start leading them, start volunteering in them. And then people were hearing from people like-minded like themselves who had their own experience. It didn't feel so patronizing in some terms that we're going to fix you, we're going to heal you. And I believe that's what I want to create through volunteers within my community. What I'm frustrated about is I can't do that, because head teachers, whether you're consultant, you'll know about this, is that I'm due an Ofsted. So what happens when we do an Ofsted? And my school, as I've assessed it under the new framework, requires improvement, which means I have to, I'm riding my school through COVID, which means that what my school most needs is a head teacher who's gearing out to the community and supporting in that, with that need, which is immense. I mean, we've had bereavements, we've had, honestly, it's heartbreaking. We've got staff with mental health issues due to, we've got children. It's just, everyone knows it's horrendous. But what I've got to think about is quality of teaching, quality of education, quality of this, because bringing an Ofsted in right now, I would probably be lucky to me, because I've overtaken from, let's just say there's a lot of work to do. Yeah. So it just leads to a lot of frustration in terms of, I'm glad this was the question, because I feel at the moment priority should be communication. They're going to rewrite an EIF for September for full reopen. I would like to see community work as a criteria on its own, behaviour and attitudes, personal development, and let's quality of education linked to post-COVID, etc. So that's where am I at. I think when it comes to community work, it's just the children's centres did it all. Play groups for toddlers that can come into school, cookery classes, healthy eating, teaching children to cross roads, all of this sort of thing.
I think what's interesting in that though, Julia, and this is a system problem. So I'm not sort of presenting this to you necessarily as a different way of approaching it, but I'd be interested in the reaction from the room. So I think somebody mentioned earlier on about it's about doing the right thing, and one of the things that I think as a network, as a Heads Up for Head Teachers network, we're campaigning for is to re-empower head teachers to do the right thing by their community, which as you've quite rightly honed in on, Ofsted strips you of some of that empowerment, because it's like, well, this is what we think should be happening, and you must focus on this very narrow set of things to do. But at some point there's a bit which I know is at the heart of what you're saying, is if I look at it through an efficient and effective lens. So the government and through the government, the Ofsted are determined for us to have an efficient education system. So it does things right. If you look at the meaning of the word effective, actually to be effective is to do the right things well. And I think that's, sometimes as a headship, that's the kind of decision making that you're doing, is about actually, I'm going to do the right thing well rather than do things right and be efficient in that. And that sounds like that's where you are. So that's why I'm saying it, because it's actually, if you think that to do that work with the community is the right thing to do for what needs to happen in your school, then, I think head teachers should be encouraged to do that right thing and not do the thing that is required for the Ofsted. And I'm saying that as somebody who got absolutely nailed by Ofsted. So, it's an easier thing it's easier to say it than it is to do it. But I would, we actively encourage head teachers across the network to do what you think is right by your context, because you are the only one that knows properly. And that, that's the most important thing. But part of that efficiency effectiveness equation is about, one of the ways that we can be efficient in our education system is by dehumanizing it. We talked about this in this forum before. If we dehumanize education, we turn it into a set of data, then it becomes much more efficient. Humanity is complex, and complexity makes things more difficult to achieve, and it requires an understanding of context and emotional leadership and human leadership. But you know, I think we should be calling, as leaders in the system, we should be calling for a system in which we are allowed to deal with the system as a human system with all of its complexities. You know, so I think that's a really important part of the community piece. How can we lead our communities if we don't know or understand our community? We can't lead it by proxy through an Ofsted framework. It's not possible. And Ofsted can never understand the complexities that are unique to each area. There's absolutely no way they can understand that and deal with that in a framework. So, you know, we've got to push past that nonsense to free great leaders like you up to do the right work in your community, because it's the right thing to do. But you'll have the support of everybody in this room and everybody else in the Heads Up network if you decide to focus in on that community work. I can guarantee that. Julie, thank you. That's lovely. And anybody else want to jump in with a contribution or a reflection on work that they have done or are doing? Chris, you're looking very thoughtful, Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, every time I think of something to say, it goes off on a different tangent, and then I have to kind of pull my thinking back round again. I couldn't agree more with what you just said there in response to Julie's situation with regard to an impending Ofsted. And I do think that if you truly know your school, then you'll build excellence around what's good for the school. So I suppose one contribution I'd make there is to say that community work for the children and making sure that they benefit from it is driven by the context of the school. And I was thinking about that in two of the schools that I was in. They're really, one of them was quite middle class. It wasn't nowhere near as middle class as they thought it was, but that was my fault because I encouraged kids to come in from urban conurbations, but never mind. What we did was a more global community aspect, because I hate to paint everybody with the same brush, but a lot of the kids reflected their parents' attitude to education, which was an entitlement that they just took for granted. And so we had a brilliant link up with, I'm not going to say a school in Gambia, because it was actually with a community in Gambia. And we built a school over there. And we got the kids involved in every aspect of that. So it started with fundraising in England and taking literally those huge containers over there full of stuff for the school and building it brick by brick. And when we finished building one, we then wanted to engage our entire multi-academy trust in building a set of schools, because some of the videos that our kids brought back showed children looking under the school gates when they were closed because they couldn't go in. And it was really teaching our kids about that value, you know, and they're trying to share some humanity. So I thought that was quite a successful thing that we did. And we also tried to make sure that we only did it in, I'm worried my internet's shaky as well. Are we all right?
Yeah, I can still hear
Yeah.
you.
You know, you'll know secondary in particular, James, end of the year doing alternative curriculum weeks and things like that. Yeah. And we had some very clear projects, community projects that we did, where our kids went out into the community and I couldn't believe what a massive impact that had on them and on the community as well. So that was really encouraging also. The other point that I wanted to make was kind of to do with something TJ put in the chat about maintaining aspiration but trying to avoid mental health concerns around stress. And I couldn't agree more with a few of the things that were said there around that is around coaching and mentoring and supporting so that people's aspirations don't frighten them, that the road to success is not one that is around passing and succeeding in that way, but is around character and is around the fact that they can build their successes around building good character. And if they feel comfortable within that environment, TJ, then they won't be as likely to be stressed about it as you were talking about. So I hope that helps as well.
Yeah, Chris, I think it's really interesting, because I think Several people have mentioned it in the chat, and then other people have talked about it as well. But this notion of, sort of disadvantaged social mobility, pupil premium, hard to reach. Somebody's put a comment in about hard to reach, and I think the same applies to what you're saying, what TJ said about aspiration. Ultimately, we create these kind of groupings to make life easier for ourselves. Ultimately, it's about individual little humans,
Yeah.
forming human beings, and the labels that we give them. And I make the same point about aspiration, because I think actually ultimately you can be as aspirational as you want to be without creating stress, as long as you know that person. And ultimately in our schools and in our communities, if we really know our young people, we know what their drivers are, we know what they're all about, we can avoid using some of those labels. The whole kind of pupil premium, disadvantaged, hard to reach thing is for me is like a sanitization of poverty. It really drives me crackers. I get really, really annoyed about it. Pupil premium, that makes it a nice word that we can bandy about in teachers' meetings, without anybody. But actually, what does that mean? Actually, what does it mean? Do we? And I think ultimately this is about knowing young people and knowing individuals and being able to put the right support in place. And I think the same applies for aspiration. And I think you're right. It can create stress if it's applied as a catch-all. We want everybody to be aspirational. Well, no, actually understand the individual aspirations of the individual young people in front of you, and understand what their drivers are, and really help those young people to achieve the thing that they want to achieve. Stretch that aspiration and ambition if it needs to be stretched, but when you know the young people, you know how far that stretch can be applied. So brilliant. Thank you, Chris. Julia, I think Julia was going to come in, and then Julia, I'll come back to you.
What you've just said really resounded with me, James. I've written about this in the working class book, actually, and a lot of people took umbrage to that title. But actually what the principle was about it was the assumptions we make about children, regardless of what that label is, and the assumptions we make about those families as well, because we all know, we all know some children in the class that are not on any list, but have got deep needs and deep needs to be heard as well. So there's an element of, and a lot of my research was based on, I set out to prove target setting was bad for kids, and actually what it proved was you just need to listen to them and spend that time with them and stop making assumptions when you don't really know what their lives are like. So that totally resonated with me. It really hit me. And then that kind of led on to virtually every piece of work I've done since. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Julia. Julie.
I was just going to add to what you were saying about aspiration. My previous school, a team of us on the senior leadership team, we were looking at, it was a high level of disadvantage and things. And part of the hard to reach and things is because some of the language, and again, not assuming, but sometimes is, if their parents haven't had careers and haven't aspired to careers, then they don't know what it is. And I think we sometimes, because of our Ofsted and the target-driven accountability system, we're always talking English, math, science, very subject-based. You need to get an education, you need to go to uni. But sometimes we're not sort of thinking about the why, the purpose, the meaning, the buy-in. So we started from very early, from reception, believe it or not, we started talking about careers and life after school. And we had, it grew over the years. It became a massive event. We involved all of the community. So in early years, it was as easy as role play. It's things that they do anyway. But we had people from all kinds of careers, YouTubers, like all of these new generational jobs coming in, and showcasing workshops. Children made things, and eventually children were understanding what this led to, these exciting opportunities that come after school. And actually we taught about careers. And I know in the Ofsted framework that this is now an expectation for secondary, but start it really, really early. And it gets children connecting education to a bigger purpose and why.
Yeah, and I think the point in that is that when we talk about aspiration, and again, it's amazing how many of these things you can track back to the same starting point, but when we talk about aspiration, actually, are we talking about aspiration across a broad set of things? Because actually, when we talk about aspiration, especially in secondary schools, what we're really talking about is, do you have an aspiration to go to university? Are you going to, you know, it's actually aspiration around an academic delivery and an academic diet. You know, we're not aspirational about the broad range of things that children might want to be aspirational about. And then we wonder why, you know, we wonder why their sort of careers advice ends up being so narrow. Well, it's because we narrow it for them, because we say it's about this, you know, being aspirational and successful in school is about getting good GCSEs, getting good A levels, and going to university. Really? Is that the only way through life? I mean, seriously? You know, and we've been, I mean, I'm talking for somebody who was a head of sixth form, we've been spinning that lie in secondary schools for most of the last 20 years. And we know it's not true, and yet we continue to do it. We know that we're sending huge numbers of children off to university, but the only thing they're doing there is creating huge levels of debt for themselves and ending up with degrees where they can't get jobs afterwards. So we continue to spin this lie. So I think it's the narrative that we put behind aspiration. And like most things that, you know, that sort of encourage people to do this, I think we really need to question what we mean by it. And in the way that you've done in the example that you've given, actually, it's a much broader. We shouldn't want children to be aspirational about helping out in their community, doing work in their, you know, that's a much broader and much more satisfying, and as you use the phrase, purposeful approach to careers and careers advice, which I really love. I am conscious of time. I'm conscious that some people have had to drop away. So this has been, as ever, just an amazing discussion. Thank you so much. The chat, we will, as we always do, we will save it. I don't know whether you managed, Kate, to get Kevin to volunteer to write the piece, because I think it is definitely worthy of a think piece. Whether Kevin actually said yes, he would do that, as it was his suggestion.
It doesn't matter whether he said yes or not.
He is doing it.
He's up for it.
He's up for it. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining. It's been a great conversation and a great discussion. Hopefully useful, hopefully inspiring. Hopefully it's given you something to go away and think about. Hopefully everybody feels, I know not everybody has spoken, but hopefully everybody feels that they've had the opportunity to. But before we go, just to make sure that I haven't missed anybody out, if you did want to say something you haven't, now is your chance. Awesome. Okay, so I'll take that as affirmation that everybody had their opportunity to speak. Lovely session. Really look forward to seeing you at the support session on Saturday or Wednesday, if you're able to join us. And indeed, our last Hopes for Ed, which number 10, I know the last one, Kate, I know, our last Hopes for Ed, which will be in a couple of weeks' time. And we will let you know who the speakers will be for that one and what the conversation and dialogue will be all about. But thank you very much for coming on this evening. Thank you for your contributions, really inspiring stuff, and great to see that across the Heads Up network, lots of great stuff is going on along this theme that we can capture and share back to big change. So that's really brilliant. Thank you, everybody, and have a great evening.